Today we have with us Caitlin Stadifort. She's what are you, HR generalist with Otics?
HR specialist.
HR specialist with Otics, and they have facilities both in Morristown and in Kodak. And if you'd like to work for them, just look up Otics online, or I'm sure we'll give out her website after this. So without any further ado, I'll turn this over to Miss Caitlin with the do's and don'ts of job interviewing.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to give some tips today. Things that we look for, general, interview do's and don'ts. Whether you're interviewing for us or a different company, they should help you no matter where you're interviewing at. So, first step is securing the interview. That's, step one. You can't have an interview unless you're selected to come in and scheduled to, actually go in and be interviewed. So some do's and don'ts for that. To actually get the call, make sure with the application you fill everything out. Don't leave any blank sections on that application. Give as much information as possible. If there's a line there, make sure you put something on it, if at all possible, if you do have any information that pertains to that. Don't make the reviewer guess anything. If the information isn't there, we're not sure what we're supposed to know. And make sure that you provide contact information, including having voicemail set up, so that way we can actually contact you if we want you to come in for an interview, rather than potentially missing that call just because your contact information isn't accurate or it's not there, or we can't leave you a message. Do make sure all the skills that you have are on that application that go with that position. Anything that we should know about you, make sure it's on there. Make sure the shift availability, if it's on that application, it's probably an important part of that selection process, so do make sure that you fill that out. And don't apply without looking at those availability requirements, especially if it's a manufacturing job or something like that. They may have multiple shifts, certain requirements that, is a big factor as far as hiring somebody. Try to also paint yourself in the best light possible on that resume or application, but do not provide any false or misleading information. So some of the reasons that people might miss opportunities to actually do the interview, if an applicant we're unable to reach them, that's the biggest issue. If we can't make the call, you're not going to get the call. So you want to make sure that your contact information is on there. One other reason, if you mark certain shift availability that doesn't align with our requirements, we're obviously less likely to give you a call. Sometimes if we have time, if the rest of your application looks great, we may call and check on that, but sometimes that's screened out in the initial process. So do make sure that you look into availability. And then any type of incomplete part of your application, could lead to missing out on an interview opportunity. So, it could appear that you have poor work history if that information is missing. Could appear that, there's a lack of interest there if you don't take the time to fill everything out. Or, you might be available for shifts and overtime, but if that's not filled out fully, then it may look like you're not available for that. Or it could just look like you're omitting information that would be important for us to know, and makes us wonder why that's not included. So a little tip from our HR department, every question is on the application for a reason, so do make sure that you fill that out. Take the time, show that you're fully interested in that position, you're invested in, um, pursuing that opportunity, and that'll increase your odds for getting that call for the interview. So this is an example of what our application looks like. If you can see that through your camera. So we've got basic information, contact information, education and skills. Then we've got availability down here. Driver's license could apply to some positions, some it doesn't. And then we've got most applications will have this, kind of the three most recent places of work. If you skip around with what you actually put on here, it's good to provide a full resume with all of your work history. If you want to put the most applicable ones on here, make sure that you also attach a resume with everything else, just so it looks like you haven't been not working, or unexplained periods of time. And some places might have this on the initial application, some might not. We've got some references here. Usually we won't call them until after the first interview, but put them on there regardless. And then, of course, eligibility to work in the U.S. and just a signature that all of that information is correct and true. So that's kind of, what most places will have on their applications. Like I mentioned, if it's on there, it's there for a reason. That's information that they need to determine whether to schedule you for an interview. So preparing for that interview, some of the things you want to do, look up the job description again, especially if you've been applying to several different positions. Just give yourself a refresher on what the responsibilities of that job are, what the requirements are, so you kind of prepare for what kind of questions might be asked. Don't forget what you applied for. If you did apply for a bunch when you're scheduling that interview, just clarify, if you don't catch it at the beginning of the phone call, who it's with, what position it's for, that kind of thing. If you've applied to quite a few, just make sure you clarify that before coming in. Learn a little bit about the company. Usually you can find that directly on the company's website. That way you might have some questions you want to ask, certain things about the company you might want to know. And again, what type of questions they might be asking you. And you also want to think of a couple questions you might want to ask. Some things that might be important to you, might be insurance, something about the job responsibilities, schedule. If those questions are important to your decision, do make sure that you ask those during the interview, so that's your opportunity to clarify those questions you might have. Also, don't hesitate to find out something that's important for that decision process for you. One thing you'll want to do, if you're not already familiar with their location, make sure you look up directions ahead of time. Plan out a little bit of extra time just in case you take a wrong turn or you lose your GPS signal. What you don't want to do is show up late. Obviously, we're understanding if you get lost or an emergency happens. Just give us a call as soon as you know you're running late. Hey, I'm on my way. I'll be a couple minutes late. I took a wrong turn, got stuck by a train, something like that. Not a big deal. Again, call if something comes up, even if you have to reschedule. We've had instances where people had a family emergency. Things happen. We're understandable about that. What you don't want to do is, show up sick in these current days with COVID. You don't want to pass anything along, even if it's not COVID. You want to be careful with that. And of course, you don't want to, not show up without any communication with the interviewer. So some other prep tips, dress appropriately for the position. If it's a manufacturing job, don't wear a tux. They'll probably show you around the plant, and you don't want to, mess it up or not be able to go out on the plant. They'll typically tell you what to wear if there's going to be a tour or something like that. Um, you know, for a manufacturing job, just make sure, clean, decent clothes. Um, you don't have to dress to the tens. Just be presentable, ready for a tour, anything like that. Bring any contact information. When scheduling, the HR representative or interviewer might share some things to bring with you. For example, for us, we do require a copy of the GED or diploma if it's for a position that requires that, or a degree. If they let you know to bring something, make sure you do that. Generally, if it's something you can't find in time, you'll be able to send it to them afterwards. Just let them know that you're still looking for it. But if you do have it, make sure you bring it with. If you tend to get nervous, um, practice a little bit with somebody if you can. Look up general interview questions and kind of think through your responses to some of those. Some examples, other than straightforward answers, might be tell me a little bit about yourself. Why are you interested in this company? Those kind of things. So you might want to think of, genuine good answers for those before you go into the interview. And of course, arrive on time. 5 minutes ahead is generally the perfect time. That'll give us time to put you wherever we're doing the interview. Too far ahead of time, we might not be available, might be an interview or something like that, and not able to answer the phone and let you in. And of course, you don't want to be late unless there's an emergency. Another tip from our HR department, it's normal to be nervous. We're looking for genuine interest in the position and good traits and skills that are good for the role. So just focus on showing that to us. We don't expect perfect interviewers every time. Just be genuine. Show us how interested you are in the position and why you're a good fit. And don't worry too much about being nervous. That's very normal. Okay, so during the interview, of course, answer positively but honestly to all the questions. You don't want to lie or speak negatively whenever possible. Obviously past experiences might not all be positive, but you want to kind of put a twist on it where you learn from the experience or something like that. You don't want to focus on the negative part of that experience. And of course, we don't want to find out that you lied about, anything on your application or during the interview. So sometimes the question might catch you off guard if it's, not a typical interview question or a personal question. Don't be afraid to, say, let me think about that one for a minute and kind of put together a good answer for that. You don't want to stumble through an answer and seem like you're unprepared for the question. Some questions are meant to see, how you think on your toes. If you take a second to think about your response, that's always a good sign. You definitely want to make sure that you share information or skills that are related to the position. Questions might not directly lead to sharing that information. So at the end, you might just want to point those out, make sure they're aware, so they get the whole picture of how you're fit for that role. You don't want to leave anything that applies to that left unsaid. So it's kind of your chance to find a balance between, be humble, but you can brag about yourself a little bit. That's when you want to share positive things about yourself as much as possible. And do ask questions. Anything you need to know or aren't sure about, that's your opportunity to get more information. So if there's a policy or anything like that you're not 100% sure about, ask for more information about it. Learning more might make things clearer, You might be less hesitant after learning more about it. So that's your time to get as much information as you need for that decision, whether, if they select you, you'll accept that position. So some post-interview tips. Before you leave, ask the interviewer what the next steps will be. Every business is a little bit different as far as what their hiring process is. Some of them might hire right on the spot. Some of them might take time for approvals, reference checks, that kind of thing. So just ask your interviewer what the next steps are so you know what to expect moving forward. Again, contact information, voicemail setup. Make sure you're easy to contact for them to follow up with you. Thank them for the interview. Excuse me, sorry. I did orientation this weekend, so I've been talking all day. Ask them, if there's any follow-up items needed, if there's any documentation you need to provide from them. Again, if they asked for a diploma or something like that and you weren't able to find it right away, get their contact information so you can send it their way once you find it, or, have the school printed or something like that. It's always good to have an idea of how long it usually takes to hear back. Like I said, some companies might hire you right on the spot. Some of them, might have a few days process to wrap up things on their end for approvals. So just make sure you know when to expect to hear back. And of course, you can always send a thank you, just a follow-up email afterwards. And if you don't hear back by the time they say to expect to, you can check in, ask them if there's anything else that you needed to follow up on to help them, with that decision, anything like that. Obviously, you don't want to uh, keep contacting them over and over again. The more voicemails in our inbox, the longer it takes to get back to people. So, once or twice is good. We'll get back to you. We want you to start as much as you do, so we're trying not to hold up the process as much as possible. And another tip from our HR department, every company, again, has a different process, and sometimes delays do happen. If we have a employee issue, HR issue, that kind of thing. Some things are time sensitive that take precedence, but we will work on your hiring process as quickly as we can. So knowing the timeline and what to expect is, beneficial to you. And of course, like I said, you can check up, make sure they have everything they need to finish up that process. So that's kind of my main tips. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I've got one for you. The For harder to place individuals, may have a something in the criminal background, or may have had um, drug issues in the past, or spotty work history. Um, you said in there, be complete and honest in your on your application. But how would you suggest that they approach those type situations?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So some applications may have a question like that on them, some might not. Certain states, it's, not allowed to ask that. Um, our application, for example, um, it does ask that question, but it does state answering yes does not basically affect your eligibility for employment. We just want to know, if there is background, um, how recently, that kind of thing. It's always best to be honest. Like I said, for us, that doesn't change your eligibility for employment. We just, want to know, especially if there's continued court dates or anything like that, if it's going to affect your attendance. you know, anything that might affect your work, that kind of thing.
Thanks. Anybody else have any questions for Caitlin?
Yeah, Caitlin, this is Bill Adams in Knoxville. I got a two-part question. The first part is, what is the most common mistake that you see a candidate make during the interview process? And then the second part of the question is, what is the most egregious or worse, a worst type of mistake that you've seen someone make during the interview process?
Let's see, I would say the most common, interview mistake, I would say, probably not being prepared. You know, we've had people come in that don't really know about our company, so they don't know what to expect. You know, if they didn't pay attention closely to the shift availability, and that's a deal breaker for them. You know, we try not to waste their time bringing them in if that's the case. Sometimes they don't, you know, pay attention closely to that. So, you know, looking at kind of the main parts of the job as far as availability. You know, we have a lot of overtime, so we make sure people know that ahead of time, just so that we don't waste their time bringing them in if it's a deal breaker for them. So just paying attention to what you're interviewing for, what you're looking for is the biggest thing as far as interviews themselves. I would say, honestly, probably the worst thing we've seen, other than just no call, no shows for interviews, is showing up under the influence. Obviously, that is a deal breaker for an employer, especially a drug-free workplace employer. I would say that's probably the quickest and surest no on our part.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.